I'm not dispositionally an aesthetic thinker, or someone who's like dispositionally.
Yeah, don't you like? I think I've heard you just say a few times you just hate art.
Oh God!
I was gonna say I'm not sure. I think I might be with Gil on this one because I'm not sure it does ennoble my character.
Hello, this is What's Left of Philosophy. I'm Owen, and here with me today is Gil.
Hello.
Will.
Hey.
And Lillian.
Hey everyone.
So today we're starting a new mini-series on aesthetics, and I figured a good place to start would be Friedrich Schiller's Letters on the Aesthetic Education of Man, written in 1794. The letters are, in many ways, a response to the ongoing French Revolution. Man has awoken, he writes, from his long lethargy and self-deception, and he demands with impressive unanimity to be restored to his imperishable rights. Yet the impetus for the letters is his concern and even dissatisfaction with the course of events. The letters are written during the Reign of Terror. It's important to remember. For Schiller, the revolution is descending into chaos, is failing to deliver on the promise of an altered, improved humanity. And there is a clear reason for this. The problems that the ideals of the French Revolution seek to address are much deeper, are almost anthropological in nature, and cannot be meaningfully addressed by the mere reconfiguration of state and the imposition of a new political constitution. Human experience for Schiller has become radically fragmented in modernity, with our natural and rational selves divided against each other. This fragmentation, he thinks, is systematically presented in Kant's philosophy, where Kant draws a rigorous distinction between mechanistic necessity of nature, on the one hand, and the moral freedom of rational subjects, on the other. As physical, natural beings, humans are motivated by animalistic compulsions, what Kant calls our sensible inclinations. But as uniquely rational creatures, we have the capacity to impose the moral law on our actions, to subordinate those inclinations to reason, and act on the basis of moral self-legislation. So that's how he tracks that fragmentation in Kant. But this division and fragmentation of the self is not limited to individuals. Society itself is divided between, on the one hand, poor people who live coarse, quote, savage lives, fettered to inclination and the necessities of nature, and on the other, a, quote, barbaric upper class who are more proximate to reason and culture, but who are all the more vile for corrupting these noble forces with lethargy and egotism. For Schiller, these
Get
riffs...
their asses.
Get them.
No mercy. No mercy.
For Schiller, these rifts at the heart of the human self and society must be overcome. Specifically, the inclinations must be brought into harmony with reason, nature with moral freedom, in such a way that no individual is reduced to a one-sided existence. In other words, it is only human beings who have been made whole, whose various faculties are harmonious and unified, that can deliver on the promises of republican freedom and political right. Schiller pleads for the instincts to be made rational so that they may serve the cause of human freedom in the social world rather than hinder it. Quote, "The most pressing need of the present time is to educate the sensibility." To educate the sensibility, to make it inclined toward moral freedom, to make us want freedom and a just social order grounded in moral principles. Quote, "For the road that terminates in the head must pass through the heart." Okay, so the question then is, what force can deliver this altered humanity? How are these sensibilities to be educated? And I'll point you to another quote. "All improvement in the political sphere must proceed from the ennobling of character. But subject to the influence of a social constitution that is still barbarous, how can character become ennobled? It would then be necessary to seek for this end an instrument that the state does not furnish, right? Instrument of ennoblement of character. Right? That instrument is the art of the beautiful. Beauty gives truth an incarnate form. Rather than one-sidedly pleasing our senses with charm, or edifying our thought, or improving our capacity for moral self-legislation, it mobilizes the totality of the human subject and all of their faculties. So I figured we'd start there. Yeah, the relationship between beauty, education of the sensibility, and the promise that holds for an altered humanity and an altered politics. So yeah, what do you guys think?
I gotta say, I rocked with this. I imagine like if I were alive back then, me and Schiller, we'd be
You guys be
boys.
tight?
Yeah, to be,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, so what I take him to be thinking about, with this notion of the fragmentation of the self, is that what he is looking for is he understands. So I think we know the critique of perhaps what he calls what he opposed to barbarians, savages.
savages. Yeah.
Savages,
We
yeah.
know the critique of like those who don't deploy their reason, their rational faculty. They are simply beholden to their instincts, their impulses, etc. But I like that what he's trying to say is that reason left to its own devices can be just as mutilating. What I notice here when he talks about the state, and we can get to that, but I'm just going to use this as an example. He constantly refers to the state as a mechanism or a machinery that grinds up life and doesn't give it an overarching organic logic, but simply analyzes things, separates things out, and thus kills the living thought for the dead letter. And so what I understand is the appreciation of art for him to get beauty isn't simply just a spontaneous reaction. It takes our reason to grasp what is beautiful, but our reason, what is grasping, is the sensibility of an ever more complex unity. And so I like this idea that I think he sees beauty as giving us the pre-appearance or a foreshadowing of what an elevated humanity would be, which is reason that doesn't deny the instincts, but informs them, shapes them, and the instincts also bring reason back into the living understanding. And I think the living understanding isn't just the individual, but the community of which I'm a part. And so I guess what he thinks is when we appreciate beauty, that's really what we're appreciating. And it takes reason to understand that that's what animates us, rather than, I guess, maybe a nice looking statue. It is actually this idea of overcoming fragmentation. So when I look at this, you might ask, how would this work in politics? But I'm not sure that that's his question. I think he thinks that we need a rich set of ideals of what a cohesive community would look like in freedom.
I mean, I think it's Rancière's question. No?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, not to be a little sideways from Schiller just by starting out, but I had this thought. So the other thing we read was Rancière's discussion of Schiller. And one of our listeners, my roommate Jeff, hi Jeff, will find this familiar because we discussed it
Hey,
yesterday
Jeff.
evening.
Shout outs to Jeff.
Hi Jeff. Shout out to Jeff.
What's up, Jeff? David. Shout out to David.
But there's something that I noticed in between these texts, the way that Rancière is talking about freedom in politics and the aesthetic moment of freedom. And he talks about it as a kind of play.
Yeah.
And I think that Schiller starts to build up this idea of play as being part of what is important about aesthetics in politics in the 15th letter. But then the whole prologue to that, what leads up to that is this whole discussion that Owen and Will were just talking about with freedom in the relationship between beauty and reason and creating the kind of backdrop for how we understand freedom. And there's something about that reason's ability to order the world in a free way that I just think is really dope about the German idealist tradition. That when I started reading the Rancière, with all due respect, I was like, this is interesting, but it is much narrower. It's a narrower set of ambitions. And you start to see this post-structuralist. I mean, I don't know if that he really counts as that, but I think of a lot of people in that French post-Althusserian vein as that's what I think of is you start to be obsessed with kind of escaping the moment of the state, escaping the police, it's a moment of escape as opposed to being even more engaged with the structuring of reality in a free way. And I think those are really different points of emphasis. And when I dive into the German idealist stuff, I'm like, whoa, this is lighting me up so bad right now. I'm like, yes, reason is on fire. Go reason. And then
Yeah, I love it.
Go reason.
And then when I'm reading Rancière, I have the inverse feeling, and this isn't very analytically precise. I'm like, I feel like I'm trying to escape like the traps of reason.
Yeah.
The traps of the
Yeah.
state, the traps of the... So there's a kind of... I don't know. Now I'm just rambling. But do you see the contrast in like the way...
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally, yeah. So we read this piece called Schiller and the Aesthetic Promise by Rancière, and I think that's completely right. I mean, there is something... Some people call it like anarchist. There's something kind of secessionist almost in like Rancière's emphasis politically, right? He's always interested in these groups that manage to escape to an extent, right? So he talks about the 1840s, the workers' movement in the 1840s. He's very interested in the fact that they were very aesthetically engaged, not just politically militant, right? That they like held plays and performances or whatever. And there was this whole aesthetic element. And he finds examples of this all over the place. But again, it's that for him, like what's promising about that is it's like secession from the dominant social order and not the reframing, as you put it, like structuring material reality in a free way, which is what Schiller wants to do, which is a much more ambitious like project.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like on the other hand, I feel you, Lillian, absolutely. But I want to say like both and, right? Because I see that in Schiller, but also this text could only exist in the wake of the French Revolution and in the wake of Kant, right? Like Kant is like the backdrop for everything, and like when he's developing this notion of play, it's coming out of Third Critique Kant. This is like only 4 years after the Critique of Judgment was written. And there the analysis of the beautiful, right, is that like beauty is this state in which there is a free play of the faculties, right? And so there's the faculty of understanding, the faculty of judgment, the faculty of reason, imagination, sensibility. And these kind of come into a free play, a sort of harmonious accord, precisely because reason kind of can't do the thing that it normally does, right? Which is like apply concepts, apply form, subsume under categories. Like that doesn't work in the aesthetic experience, right? And so that's a freeing up of the faculties of cognition to sort of do something other than what they normally do in this like imposition moment of like the rational cognition. And also at the same time, the whole first 10 letters, which we read, are him trying to be like, hey, you know what fucking didn't work about the French Revolution? It's also so interesting how much this like presages like Hegel. Like the French Revolution like is characteristic because it becomes terror, and it becomes terror because it is just rational, because it doesn't have...
It's impositionist.
Impositionist, right? Like you get the ideal and you're like, let's just fucking do it. Let's just get the state going in a new way. We're going to make freedom happen. And like, whoops, turns out you get Robespierre.
How'd that happen? You know?
Right? So like this is why he turns to fine art. He thinks that like, you know, trying to just like make freedom a thing through the state it can't work until we're already a better kind of person, and we couldn't be a better kind of person until the state already exists. There's this kind of apparatic thing going on. You know, we'd need to have, this is sort of classic kind of eudaimonia problem, right? Like we'd need to be better kinds of people in order to build a better society, but we'd need to live in a better society to become better kinds of people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he then turns to like art, aesthetics, beauty to try to get out of that impasse. I'm not entirely convinced, but I get it. I get why you'd want to find an escape from that, you know?
He uses this really interesting metaphor of the problem with political development is unlike the clockmaker who can just stop the gears and repair the watch, we can't just stop the state and then get the work that we need done and become the type of people we need to be. So I find that there is this tension. I hear what you're saying, Gil, but I also hear what Lillian is saying is that he doesn't think that we can just exit the state and then develop ourselves and then come back and remake the state. In fact, he thinks that we have to balance this issue of bringing what he calls hypothetical man, which I take as the moral creature, from natural man that exists, and we can't. I think he says explicitly, we can't forget natural man along the way and be like, fuck that dude. We're doing hypothetical man. And so, I think an interesting question to ask is, why does he think the state is unable to simply deliver this notion of harmony that he thinks, fine art can? I see kind of two questions here. One, I think he does think that the state is necessary. I think, that for him, the state is the embodiment of reason, and, it has, structures, but, the state without the sensibility of harmony becomes a mutilating engine.
Yeah.
And so there's this one reason why he thinks the state can't simply do it. I think the other question is, why does he think fine art can?
Yeah.
And, look, that it might seem wild. Like, he's definitely not the first to think this. This is going to
Or
be, I
the
guess, maybe
last.
another, or the last. I don't know,
The
'cause I was gonna
aesthetic
say,
revolution is persistently underway, comrades.
like, it doesn't stop. This might be a hot take, but Du Bois, Souls of Black Folk, the end of the training of black men, when he says, "I sit with Shakespeare above the veil," and he winces not. My dude is straight up saying,
Let's go.
that's the way beyond the color line.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be interesting to talk about why the state can't do this and whether the state has this type of mechanical mutilating function for us now, and what is different about fine art that allows us to ennoble our character.
Yeah, I don't know. I have trouble with this because I'm not dispositionally an aesthetic thinker, or someone who's like dispositionally.
Yeah, don't you like? I think I've heard you just say a few times you just hate art.
Oh God!
I was gonna say I'm not sure. I think I might be with Gil on this one because I'm not sure it does ennoble my character.
No, I'm not ennobled.
But continue.
At all.
I do like that this breakdown usually does happen. Me and Owen, I imagine we're more like,
Yeah.
fuck yeah. Let's get with this art.
Yeah.
Gil and Lily, like,
Yeah,
I enjoy
Gil
it.
and
I'm
I
not
are
sure
like the
ennobled.
rationalists in the pejorative sense. We're
Yeah,
like-
in a very pejorative sense. Like, I'm not fun to go to a museum with. I'm like, yeah, it's a nice painting, you know?
Yeah, I'd never take you to a museum
Oh,
there.
man.
Gil and I will be at the
Colors, I
bookshop
guess?
or the
Yeah,
You are
bar.
a film. You are a film. I will say that you are a film appreciator, though. So come on.
I do.
What about
I
film?
like film. Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
Okay,
But
film
even
gets
then,
biased.
I actually watched 2 really good films last night. Whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I do wonder why this is supposed to work, right? Like, I get kind of schematically, right, this idea of like a free play of the faculties and like the sort of harmonious unity that aesthetic contemplation can engender. I don't know. I don't know if I find compelling the line that like this is the move given the state of fragmentation that we in modernity find ourselves, right? And this is like his pitch. I think I get the critiques of like the alternatives, right? He's like, pure reason ain't going to get us there. Surely he's like also got beef with Kant's practical philosophy, right? He thinks that like, trying to just impose the moral law or like lay out the universal moral law, he's like, that ain't it. And I get why that's not satisfying. I'm just not sure that the sculpture in letter 15 is going to get us there.
Maybe one place to try to hash this out is there's a point in the letters where he starts making what sounds like almost a cold stream, warm stream type of argument, right? That like the state, he aligns it with the analytical coldness of like rationality, and then says that he speaks of like the warmth of the heart and the necessary fusion of that cold rational law with the warmth of like basically what I quoted in the introduction, right? Like that has to find, in order to find a way to your head and be truly compelling, it has to go through the heart. And I mean, that's I think an ineluctable element of politics. It can't just be like, I don't know, a process of like rational imposition of what the moral law is and like demanding. There is an element of it in which like motivation becomes important, in which like the will becomes important. And like if you don't engage the will and you don't engage in altering or shaping or at least like affecting that will in any kind of way, I don't know, your political project is gonna have a hard time like succeeding. I think that's a fair point for him to make. Now, whether art actually delivers that missing element of politics, just that kind of cold stream that seems to dominate politics, it's sussy.
I mean, especially since art, like this is a non-aesthetic person point, and so my apologies for the basicness of it, but art that is too like rational or pedantic is just not art. So I do find myself thinking like art, in order for it to be beautiful in a way, it has to be kind of unintendedly so, and that's not what politics is about. Like there are unintended consequences, but there are. I'm having a hard time articulating this point, but I'll just like refer to what maybe it was the 10th letter or something when he says actually beauty and political harmony have never existed at the same time.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's a
wild
crazy
moment.
That's a crazy thing to say if this is your point of view. So I feel that there's something persuasive about that. Like when you think about where does good art come from? Well, a lot of places. I mean, I don't really know what good art is, but let's just assume I do. And just say like what's really compelling, what's really moving. A lot of the time it comes from moments of crisis, from conditions of oppression, from unsuspected quarters that are like not really they're the expression of distress or something. There's art all the time, but there is something to be said about those being out of sync with each other. And so if you want to rely on art as an expression of a politics, it's almost like it can't really be done within the politics itself. It has to be the consequence of something else. And I do think that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to back up and just say that I think that in the beginning, the setup of all of this has to do with truth and beauty in the state. And it's not about art as like a political fix.
Right.
It's about a way of thinking about politics aesthetically. And I think that that's where it becomes more plausible to me. Like, what are the aesthetics of politics rather than what does fine art bring?
Yeah, what are the aesthetics of politics rather than like what are the politics of art? Like
Correct.
what are,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point maybe I'll have us do the Du Bois Alain Locke debate on the relationship between art and politics, because Du Bois has this very strange point that people have been trying to figure out, and I believe it's called Art and Propaganda or something. It's the essay where he thinks art lays claim to a type of truth that is different than the truth that you get from sociological analysis, and he does want art to be politically enabling. But what I take Du Bois to mean, and then I'll link it to Schiller because obviously this isn't about Du Bois, is that what Du Bois is trying to mean is that art can set before us particular ideals that aren't actually reconcilable with the status quo. And so Schiller starts talking about this notion of the mission of the artist is yes, to be a child of your age, but not to simply be a mere expression of one's age. And so I wonder if art has a more indirect relationship to politics. So I actually completely agree. Art that is didactic, I actually don't even think Schiller means a didactic type of art.
No,
definitely not.
I think it's because there's no play of the faculties in didactic art, right? There's no indeterminacy. It's just like didactic art is meant to like the image is supposed to be subsumed immediately under like a concept and a moral principle.
So it's almost too reasonable.
Yes.
It speaks to reason as it understands itself. And so art gives us an answer to how do we create the space of creativity to develop ideas that aren't simply descended from the dominant ideology, status quo, literally state ideology of the moment that one is in. And sometimes that is made possible by being able to step back from the constant inane ways the state talks about politics must be done, political ideals must be adhered to. So it isn't itself politics, but it creates the space for generating the type of ideals or the type of harmony from which a new politics could emerge. And so maybe it's trying to answer this question of how do new ideas come to animate, to use Owen's language, come to animate or motivate us beyond simply trying to integrate into the state as it is. And that's a different type of education. I think it requires a different type of sensibility to not simply repeat back whatever has been given to you.
Yeah, didacticism doesn't work at all. I mean, he says at some point that only a human being can play, and it's only in playing that one is really human, which is really interesting. I don't quite know. Maybe we can bring this back to this question of fragmentation, because this is a big critique of the modern age, I think. And he thinks that Kant systematizes it, but it's that we've got this we're divided against ourselves individually, right? And he thinks that insofar as that remains the case, we're not going to be able to be non-divided socially. And this is one other way of articulating the problem with the French Revolution. He's like, yeah, until like Owen said in his intro, until you address that sort of weird, deep anthropological issue, try to reconstitute society all you like. And there is this way in which play gets us out of this either purely analytic mode or purely sensible mode where as Will was just saying, we're just receiving, right? And then maybe just reproducing the impressions of the world around us. And there is something creative that's possible there. And that's only possible when we're unified. I think that's kind of his idea.
I wonder if what's going on here, even with play, is that Schiller is also looking at how art can increase our capacities for a type of spontaneity or
Hmm.
improvisation that isn't simply senseless and without reason. In fact, let me just say real quick what I mean by improvisation. Whether you find it aesthetically pleasing or not, freeform jazz. So I don't, I'm a mutilated character. I don't know how great freeform jazz is of like, the John Coltrane's of the world and all of that.
The
I
goat.
am told it is beautiful, though.
The
I am
goat.
told they are the
my,
goat.
my, my
So again,
literally my favorite shit on all of Earth.
but if you think that to do that means that they just go in cold and just start playing that, I think that's a real misunderstanding of that art. It takes incredible amounts of discipline and
Hmm.
training to be able to respond spontaneously to the ensemble around
Hmm.
you.
Yeah.
And so, like, to bring this to politics again, I don't want to be didactic about it, but when you are organizing or engaging in a political movement, there must be space for a type of spontaneity improvisation, not just with the fellows with whom you're engaging, but as the environment changes. And it turns out that spontaneity, it's not easy. If you think
Hmm.
that I'll know to do it when it happens, many of us will just fall back on what we already know, and often that's not up to snuff. And so he has this great line in letter 8. Reason has accomplished all that she can accomplish by discovering the law and establishing it. Its execution demands a resolute will and ardor of feeling. If truth is to be victorious in her conflict with forces, she must herself first become a force and appoint some drive to be her champion in the realm of phenomena. For drives are the only motive forces in the sensible world.
Hmm.
This notion of drive, I understand, as a type of spontaneity and the ability to react to the changing and shifting landscape. And ironically or paradoxically, I'm not sure which word I'd use here, it turns out that that actually requires a type of discipline of reason in
Mm.
order to be able to
Hmm.
engage in this drive of spontaneity.
It requires like some formation, like Bildung.
But yeah,
I was gonna say like so. Truth must become a force. I mean, isn't this a classic problem that even a lot of Marxists like face though, which is that critique, like just showing and demonstrating rationally the truth of something, doesn't seem to be incredibly compelling. I mean, I've made this point before too. Like we understand like really well now, I think, all of the elements of like domination that make our lives like so difficult, right? And make them impoverished and whatever, right? All these constraints on realizing freedom and all of that. But his basic insight is just that the understanding, it just seems to be incredibly weak. It doesn't seem, understanding something doesn't seem to be very motivating, right? And so that's what he says at a certain point. Like, I just want to read this line. I can't remember where it's from, but he says, "There must be something in the spirit of man which prevents us from receiving the truth, notwithstanding the brilliant light she diffuses, and from accepting her, whatever may be her strength for producing conviction." Right? There's something that makes it difficult to internalize the truth and to have it become integrated with your whole personality, with your whole self, right? And like there, I can see there an important role for art, maybe not necessarily like fine art as we understand it, having been institutionalized and whatever through a set of museums and schools or whatever. But I think that that's just got to be right, though. That this is a predicament that is a constant recurring predicament that like, we can lay things out as clearly as possible. The rays of truth can shine incredibly brightly, and they just don't. People just look at it impassively, and they're just like, okay, that's the truth, okay, and then just go on with their. You know what I mean? It doesn't light any fire, right? It doesn't motivate.
Are you guys ready for a quote?
Yeah.
Let's go.
always.
Okay. So in the 9th letter, he says, "To the young friend of truth and beauty who would inquire of me how, despite all the opposition of his century, he is to satisfy the noble impulses of his heart, I would make an answer. Impart to the world you would influence a direction towards the good, and the quiet rhythm of time will bring it to fulfillment." I think that the problem, the missing element
I wanted to
here
bring this up. Yeah,
is time and history.
Time.
I'm kind of getting blown away by thinking about historicity, and I fucking hate that word because it's very academic. But but what I mean by it is the sense of history, the sense of being part of history, and having a direction to history. Like, you can criticize that history is not linear all you want, but the sense of having a direction to history is the main puzzle in this tradition. Kant's whole thing, like, we have to posit that I'm free. That's because it's not just that I have to think that to act. It's because to feel that it's linked up to progress. It's linked up to you have to have a sense that you're going somewhere. Okay. And we live in a time where no one feels that they're going anywhere. It's an incredibly ahistorical time. And there's something about the relationship between truth and beauty that is related to seeing the historical arc and the temporal arc. And that's what I was saying when I talked about Rancière. You lose this temporal arc in post-structuralism and in postmodernism. I mean, avowedly so. This isn't a slam at them. I'm just saying, like, it's just a fact. They don't like the theory of history, yeah?
They don't like meta-narratives, yeah.
They don't like the meta-narrative.
Lyotard specifically, yeah.
Right, they don't fuck with it. I think whoever is listening can grant me that. They don't like it. Okay, so here's all the things that we lose when you stop liking it. When you're like, this isn't what we're a part of anymore. And this is, in fact, a part of domination. Then you start talking about contingency and play and blah, blah, blah. And then we're just going in and out of power. You know, where's the power? Let's just move away, get away from the police, you know? And I'm kind of being nasty about it at this point. But, like, there is a problem with your aesthetic understanding of, like, what motivates people if you think that that's going to, like, lead to emancipation or anything like that.
So is what you're saying, we might need meta-narratives?
Oh, I'm pro meta-narrative.
Okay, pro meta-narrative.
But I'm giving you the aesthetic grounds for why I think that matters. And, like, I've had, you know, some of my friends in Berlin, because I'm more of, like, the cold stream, as it were, debating me about this. And I'm like into, like, listen, we need the facts, man. Like, we need to be able to, like, be armed with the facts, because all of this, like, willy-nilly stuff is, like, really not helping us, like, advance the issue. So we need to, like, have a cold stream that's a little bit more hard-nosed and, like, tries to respond to problems. That's kind of my basic orientation. But, like, my friends are like, listen, I don't think you understand how romantic the old left was about communism. Yeah, like, I don't think you understand the sense of feeling. Okay, and then I thought about that, and I'm like, it's true, I don't understand. I've never experienced anything like that. But I think that Schiller is giving me, like, the best case I have for, like, why that's necessary, but it's related to time. You have to have a sense of that in order to cultivate that motivation, that sense of direction.
So if I could play the part of a bit of a Adornian cultural critique here. Obviously, the point of this episode is not to completely convince you to be Schiller-pilled. Cards on the table, I'm a bit Schiller-pilled. I think the rest of us, we're like, this is pretty dope to read. But here it seems to me to be the practical, sort of counterfactual question. What would society be like without art, or with incredibly thin and shallow art? So my Adornian sort of cultural critique is one might look at the massive art that we have now, which shows up on Netflix, Amazon, movie theaters. If Adorno would still be alive, it's really strange that so much of the art that's produced are a bunch of prequels and sequels that are constantly returning to the same story over and over again. I'm going to tell you, and I'm ashamed to tell you, I last week saw the Harry Potter play that is a sequel to the Harry Potter novel. I don't support J.K. Rowling. That's
Canceled.
Canceled.
Was it good?
No, it was not.
Have been.
You know what's incredible? I went in and I thought, oh, so what's the new story they're going to tell? Of course, it's about all the same characters, except it's about their children. But even the quote-unquote bad guy, spoiler alert, go ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to know.
Who cares?
It's still Voldemort. It's like, they're, even though the guy's dead, they do this time travel stuff. I'm just like, this looks to me like the complete exhaustion of imagination. The idea that we can't even, in minimal pop culture stories, try to tell something that goes beyond our sort of romanticized idea of when things were pretty great back in 1998. Like, we are stuck in 1998. Think about how despairing that is. And so my sort of counterfactual question is something like, what happens to a society in which its art doesn't even engage the enervating capacities of reason and feeling and simply just repeats back to you the same thing over and over again? And so I'm with Lillian. I think that there is something important of this feeling of direction of going somewhere, even if it's unclear or inchoate, this sense of this movement. But what I think most of us have now, and so much of our art reflects this, is either we're not going anywhere or the way that we're going is disaster.
Mm.
And I do think that that has effects on our practical character. And yes, I know, of course, economic and social situations do as well. But the mutilation of even sensibility,
Hmm.
once you have dropped the veil from my eyes, I see how bad things are. Why don't I just react and say, well, there's nothing that we can do. This is
Yeah.
the
Why
way
don't we
things
just be
are.
nice together? Like nice to each other and everything everywhere all at once, and we just adopt
Okay.
Oh
this
God. Oh,
idiotic form of like just offensive existentialism, and then just say, "Oh, the solution is just to be kind because we can't do anything about any of this anyway." Fuckers.
And if that's what I did,
completely
Fucking
agree
she
so
with
came
you.
in hot.
insane.
She came in
Fuck
hot,
that. Fuck
but
that
I
movie.
can't. I
Horrible.
can't say that that's
Literally
completely
so offensive.
wrong. The sentimentality, there is something sort of pacifying about it, rather than, but what is the world we could create? And I think Schiller is trying to say, when we start understanding this, this complex unity, we would also start to understand a radically different world we could create, where there isn't just feeling, there isn't just reason, but they do form a dialectical unity, which they inform and shape one another. And I want to emphasize this. He definitely doesn't talk about getting rid of reason. He's not the type
No.
of romantic where he's just like go into the vertiginous, go into the abyss of irrationality and feeling. And so he's talking about how these could co-constitute each other in a mutually beneficial manner.
So I want to say, first of all, fuck J.K. Rowling, turf slog off, fuck a transphobe. But there's like a moment where, as much as he's indebted to Kant, Schiller departs from Kant pretty radically, actually, at the level of practical philosophy in a way that I found interesting. Like whenever I teach the grounding for the metaphysics of morals, like a really important point I think to make for Kant's moral philosophy is that he doesn't think that it's enough to do the right thing if it's a matter of inclination, right? Like he's so insistent that actions only have moral worth or value if they're done out of respect for the moral law, if they're
Pure
done
goodwill.
out of duty. And this is why we have the whole discussion about maxims, right? And the difference between duty and inclination is crucial. And Schiller, I think, doesn't fucking care about that. He's like, you know what? In terms of content, a good action done out of inclination is as good as a good action done out of duty. And the thing to try to do, Kant's so fucking Protestant, right? He's like, you have to not want to do the right thing and do it anyway. And
Yeah.
Schiller's like, no, the point is to get us to a place where we want to do the right thing, where inclination and duty line up. That's not
They are
morally ambiguous.
That's a good point. They're so distant on this point because there's a point in the Critique of Practical Reason where Kant says that the only affect that should accompany like acting from like pure goodwill
Yeah.
is pain.
Oh, this is gonna be great. Yes,
Pain,
I knew
yeah,
it.
is pain.
My man wasn't gonna let me down. That fucking rocks.
Pain is the only legitimate affect that should accompany like acting from reason and the moral law.
What a maniac.
Which is
That's
crazy.
bananas. A bananas thing to say out loud.
I mean, you can just picture Schiller like, okay, that's gonna sell super well. That's gonna really spread like wildfire through the population. Like people are really acting from the moral, acting
This
from the moral
man,
law.
he knows how to sell.
welcoming the
reason.
pain. Yeah.
I just Googled was Schiller Catholic, and it says no, not at all. But then the first link is the uncharacteristic Catholic moments of Friedrich Schiller, and apparently
yeah.
there's all these articles. There's faith by good
Love
works,
it.
my friends.
Yeah.
Yes, I love this.
No, and he
for
thinks
him.
that like this is part of what the work of like aesthetic production, aesthetic creativity can do is try to bring these things into harmony with each other. Our duty, our recognition of what's right as a consequence of our rational activity, and our inclinations as sensible beings, like those shouldn't be opposed. It shouldn't be this painful thing, and it shouldn't be a matter of indifference. Like it should feel good to do right. And he thinks that this is what aesthetics can point us in the right direction towards. I like that.
He's also trying to like overcome a too rigid distinction that comes from Rousseau too between force and right. Right? And his question is like how to give like right forcefulness rather than just have it be like a set of cold moral principles that don't compel the heart, right? That don't become a social force.
I mean, now look, I've forgotten about that line of the one aspect. You're allowed to, like, I'm gonna be thinking about that all day. When I think about this problem of fragmentation, it can be easy to be very, metaphorical with it. But if you look even at our culture today, I really think that so much of the bitter pill we're sold about doing the right thing, solidarity is, yeah, it's going to fucking hurt. You're going to want to do what you enjoy, but you'll know that in the interest of put social value here. You can put diversity here. You can put equity here. You can put, freedom. Even when people talk about abolishing capitalism, like it will fucking hurt. And it strikes me as the fact that that's sort of like almost the background sensibility is the problem is that we have these things that feel good, but they're not right. And we have these things that are right and don't feel good. And in some ways, there's something natural about that. It's just we need to really lean into it. We need to lean into our fragmentation. And that's an incredible vision of humanity, I've got to say.
This is kind
I
of
literally don't believe it.
this is kind of blowing my mind a little bit. Like, I mean, the idea of like self-abnegation, as the way forward
Abolish
in terms
yourself.
is the way forward in terms of like making any meaningful like social political transformation is just so wild. I mean, think of the contrast between like Schiller who's saying like no, what I'm describing here will be experienced as like joyous like flourishing of your whole self.
Yes.
Like it's not going to be experience of self-abnegation. Like the point, you know what I mean? Like,
well, because he's encountering us in a condition of alienation from ourselves already, right? Like this is like like the way in which we could link this up with like a social political critique and like a more Marxist sort of vein. What would it mean to be like, you're going to have to alienate yourself further in order to make any progress? It's like, motherfucker, I'm already so alienated. I'm already cut off from myself. I'm already disunified.
What more do you want?
You're already disunified.
Yeah, no, I am. Like, you want me to do more?
my job has disunified the shit out of me. Okay?
You want me to lean in? You want me to lean in right now? I don't think so, pal.
I hear that's sometimes the way to go. I mean, so here's the way that I try to make it sensible. Imagine, and I'm speaking like kind of to the listeners, when you've seen something and you're like, wow, that is beautiful. And it's not beautiful just because it's irrationally beautiful. I think often when any of us have had this experience of listening to a piece of music, like I hear Lillian recently was converted to the Snoop Nation and all of that, or Gil watching a movie, we can one give reasons for why it's beautiful, but also it isn't simply reasons. It feels good, and we know it feels good.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is supposed to be the insight. And it's not that the piece of art itself tells you, here's what to do politically.
Right.
But that experience, I think, gives insight to a type of truth of what the human character could be capable of, and why should that only be left for ephemeral moments rather than that is a kind of direction where we could go. The details of how to do that and the objective impediments to doing that, aesthetics cannot solve that for you. That's the cold stream more. But I think something like that, when I see something beautiful, and whether it's movie, music, etc., I feel this sense of unity, and it's not just random. Like, oh, that's why that was actually really well done. Look at what they did here. And it seems to me reason, passions, they do align in that moment. It's great. And then it ends, and I'm like, oh, I'm back to my old life.
I fully buy that. Like that is the experience of the beautiful, though. It is that kind of suspension of the subsumption of sensible particulars under some concept. When you see something beautiful, you should be arrested by it. You shouldn't be able to have like some instant like explanation for, I don't know, why it is that it strikes you or whatever. It should be kind of arresting. It should set like some faculties into play. I mean, and I also think that there is something, and I don't know, I hesitate to say it's politically good or important. I don't know. But the vast majority of the experiences and like perceptions we have, the things that are, I don't know, let's say art objects that are presented to us in the broadest possible sense. I mean, it's like advertisements and shit that's meant to solicit very base, like coarse, sensible pleasure to please your inclinations. We get lots of moral imperatives shoved in our faces, whatever, right?
And racism.
and moral imperatives. Neither of these things are art. There should be a domain of experience that we like cultivate and like celebrate as a society that is like centered around neither of those experiences, but around the kind of suspension of either like moral imperatives or just fucking stuffing our faces.
This is why, like, he's like I said, he's like, this text only exists in the wake of the third critique, right? The first move of the third critique is to be like, okay, when I'm talking about the beautiful, I don't mean the agreeable. I'm not talking about the pleasant. Like,
I'm not talking about charm.
Yeah,
he calls that charm. Like it's just that kind of.
It's not it. It's not just like
what we call something pretty. You know?
It's not pretty. It's not. That's not what art's about. That's not what the beautiful is about, right? There's something else going on there, and I think that's true. And like you said, Will, like there is like a feeling of like, I don't know, self-unification and arrest, as Owen said. It's also beyond utility, right? Like he says at some point that the dogma of the present age in which he's writing is utility, and he's like, art's not fucking useful. It's not for that. You're doing it wrong if you're trying to make art for utility purposes.
Yeah, I'm always so conflicted about like socialist realism. You know, those like those paintings are just like really celebrating and aggrandizing workers. I mean, they're all over murals in the Soviet Union. It was a major part of like the Soviet project. There was a component of it which was an aesthetic project meant to ennoble character by like not celebrating elites or whatever, but by celebrating, workers, right?
Yeah, and that's like totally subsumed to utility and didacticism.
Totally subsumed to. I mean, the reason I feel torn is because some of those images go so hard. I love them so much. Like, murals of just like industrial workers and nurses and farmers and shit or whatever. Like just like the huge in the center square of the city. Like I think that's like really cool. But yeah, I think on this, and I agree with this Schillerian, and Rancière makes this point too, that isn't actually art. It's doing something different. It's like agitprop, and that can have a place or whatever, right? But
I'm pro agitprop.
There's an pro agitprop too, right? But there's
not, that's too, by the way.
That's not aesthetic experience.
Like all art propaganda. Do it.
Yeah.
One of the best exhibits I went to about like socialist art was at the Art Institute of Chicago. This was years ago. I went with my mom, and there was an exhibit on 1917. It was literally the best exhibit I've ever been to. And it was, there was socialist realism there. I mean, that was the vibe, but it was this kind of modernism. And I think you saw the expressive moment of the time in a way that was consistent with the kind of agitprop stuff, and that was very distinct from it. And so I do think that, I think that we have a very low level of knowledge about the kind of output of that world. I think that anti-communism has created in the West a real ignorance. I mean, just ignorance in a motivated ignorance that is sort of obvious about the East. But the way, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Owen, but like the way people think about that world as that, like that is Soviet art. But actually it's not. Or like you think about just kind of paid bureaucrats doing, in quotes, Marxist philosophy, and because Lukács said it became sterile, and Adorno said it's sterile, and whatever, then that's what it was. But like all of those people just got straight up fired, and and everything after the Soviet Union collapsed. And so the truth is that we don't know very much about that at all. And it's very rare that you will see people like that cited because people don't read those languages. They haven't been translated. It's really kind of a lost aesthetic universe. And I think it would be very interesting for people to retake an interest, because to think about what a revived aspirational aesthetic culture would look like on the left, you can't repeat something from the past, but finding new possibilities, because I do find that this is probably going to offend some people, but most of what we're doing on the left right now is LARPing, intellectually, culturally, and aesthetically. Sadly, it's true. I'm full of nostalgia for certain things. I'm not exempt from this. But when you see the things people, it's like we're not over 68. We're never going to be over 68. We're never going to like move past these kind of like moments in which we seem to think that they were doing something better than us. Occupy. We're never going to move past these moments. And even in the popular culture, I don't know if you've noticed this, but all the music is like a repetition of the 90s and early 2000s. It's wild. It's great to be a millennial right now.
1998.
It's coming back.
This is our world.
No, I'm serious. I hear these songs sampled, and no, I get like it's longer ago than it probably seems like to me. That's a part of like growing older, but like I really do think it's odd that most of, like, a lot of really successful songs right now are samples of something that's 25 years old, and just really actually just remaking them, and they're good, but they're good because I already like that, you know. So there's something
Yeah.
there's something really odd right now about our ability, and that's kind of what I was saying about the sense of time, and what I got the sense that Will was saying about repetition. There is something strange happening right now. Like, part of our moment is to feel kind of trapped in time and to feel like we're not moving forward. And that is playing out in the aesthetics, like not just in how we feel, but like in fact in cultural production. That is what's happening. And it's bizarre. Like, we're re-scandalizing ourselves. The first person to do this, the first person to do that. Whoa, sex. Oh my God. People have never done it like that before. I mean, it's wild. But no, it's so weird. You know, there's something kind of strange about it all.
Absolutely.
I sometimes feel myself, to be of two minds of art and aesthetics, because what's striking, if you take seriously the non-utility of it, is it would mean that actually good, quote unquote, left art would not be art that just, clearly, I like Lillian's language, LARPs as left art. That LARPs on, I already know these are your sensibilities, so here it is, I'm going to repeat it back to you, but it would have to have a type of daring, a type of verve to it. For some reason, one of the examples that really comes to me too, the first time I saw Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, and it wasn't simply preaching to me about what I was supposed to think, and I was stunned by it. I really love Owen's language. I was arrested by it. I'm not going to speak to Spike Lee's production afterwards, but there was just something really striking in those images and that life that I was being inducted into. And I think there is a problem here of so much of our art is just weighed down by a nostalgia that might even be a false nostalgia of a better time of aesthetic sensibilities. And it just seems to me, and maybe this is just me putting myself out there, I do think that there is something important for people having the space and the ability of being arrested by beauty that breaks them out of this logjam of just being bent back into the past and always searching for that, but creates the space of a kind of creative free play, as we've been talking about, that opens you up to the sense of something else rather than being on this treadmill of trying to bring back something that will never come back.
Yeah, could I just like follow along with this and be mean for a minute? I'm going to channel some of Lillian's energy. I'm on this tip. This is
Wait,
great.
are you about to be mean to me, though?
No, you're going.
Okay, all right. Then go for it.
Okay. No, like, I think that there's something important. I know this is like killjoy shit, but I think there's something actually significant about the fact that since 2008, the largest all of the biggest cultural production is superhero movies. It's all fucking Marvel shit. It's comic book stuff. And I'm sorry, like, there's like so many weird contradictions. It's supposed to be fantastic.
We're all babies. We're babies.
This is it's baby shit. It's supposed to be fantastic and like fantastical, and it's not. It's mundane. It's boring. We know it already. It's songs we've already heard. It's ridiculous. And it's all sequels and prequels and reboots. And there's no poetry coming from the future.
Yep, that 18th Brumaire right there.
Yeah, literally, like, it's embarrassing. I'm sorry to say. Look, if you're out there and you like some of these Marvel movies, whatever, I don't care. It's you can. Yeah. I'm not really of the school of let people enjoy things. I think this is pretty shitty at this point.
Yeah, we know you hate that. You're like, no. We're not normalizing anything. We're not letting people enjoy shit.
No, we're over.
Gil's just there with his finger wagging.
Absolutely.
Well, Gil's that meme of I consent. Isn't there someone you forgot to ask?
I feel like what you just said is true. The infantilization of the culture, where like play isn't something that's aspirational that has a direction. Play is actually like an escapism. So I'm gonna watch Marvel movies. That's what that is, and I think you can see a lot of like weird childhood stuff. I mean, I was just made aware to my dismay that stuffed animals. The fastest growing market for stuffed animals are like people my age.
Oh God,
we're so fucked.
Yeah.
So there's something.
Wait, what?
I'm just gonna say I was made aware of this fact, and
that's upsetting.
So when you think about like regression, getting rid of progress has consequences, and some of those are not that
Something
nice.
else will take its place, and here you go.
Regression happens. And I don't think you have to be like curmudgeonly and old to say that, because I'm making these criticisms as someone has no taste whatsoever, except for in things I've listened to for like 20 years. Like, there are some things that I have osmosis, acquired knowledge, but I don't have any special taste. So I'm not saying this as somebody who just like, I don't like fine art that much, but I wish somebody did. Like, I think other people should like it to lead
I just
me
want
to
to say
the,
about
in the right
fine
direction.
art though, and the stuffed animals. I don't like know a ton about it. I used to be more abreast of what was up than I am now. But like what you're describing with the stuffed animal thing, that's also, by the way, that kind of aesthetic is pretty dominant in fine art too. Like, you know, Jeff Koons.
Oh, I hate Jeff Koons.
He loves to make those like big like poodle, like they look like big stuffed animals, and they're just really huge and purple and shiny
Balloon animals.
Yeah,
I'm gonna look this up.
Oh, it's
Maybe I'll
awful.
get into
one of the
it.
I've seen
one of the
those,
Time for me to
bleakest.
regress.
And it's just like a profoundly embarrassing, again, really infantilizing and fucking annoying and really depressing regression.
I'm increasingly becoming warm to the idea of being comfortable in put it in all the scare quotes in a materialist, socialist, Marxist fashion of talking about, a problem of a type of like, spiritual corruption. And I don't mean that in a sort of, woo-woo way. I do mean it turns out if you're just expecting emancipation, liberation, freedom to happen while our characters are being, distorted, turned back on themselves, shaped in a direction of infantilism, etc., you can't get away from it. And Schiller's, he says this too about the state. Well, it is people who make the state. So we should wonder what those types of people are.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand the hesitancy on the left of not wanting to talk about it because it can seem like you're going to leap into moralizing.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessary. And I think, again, that speaks to our stunted tradition and sensibilities. And we have very little grammar to talk about that without setting off the moralization police. And maybe it's a problem that we only seem to be able to talk about in terms of moralization. It seems to me almost non-materialistic respect. Good things will happen even while
Right.
we ourselves are not people predisposed to bring about good things. Hopefully the iron laws of necessity will figure it out.
I don't think
Well,
so.
more power
Doesn't
to
seem
them.
likely.
I've got my fingers crossed, but I think we should be able to talk about this. And you can give robust, and I don't think we can do the space of this episode, you can give robust materialist analysis of why this is happening in culture. You can look at the problem of big movie studios gobbling up smaller movie studios, basically erasing the mid-tier film from existence. So it's only indie films and blockbusters.
Yeah.
You can do all of that, but let's just look at like, but why is it our taste? These movies make billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So what is going on here?
This is also true of fine art, though, too. I mean, I don't know. When the last time you guys have been into a contemporary art museum, it is just wild the extent to which everything looks like total dog shit. Like nothing, there's nothing visually, there's nothing arresting, like visually. It's all so heavily concept driven. It's very heavily concept driven, at which point I'm always like, why don't you just go do philosophy? Like that's the concept zone. Like why are you fucking around with ugly ass like shit and just
work
go do
harder,
the thing.
Actually develop concepts.
Like learn,
We do.
learn-
That's what we do.
So you've got bad concepts. Listen, you've got terrible concepts. You've got totally visually just awful, disgusting, unarresting, uninteresting like art. And it's all massively fucking commodified and super expensive, and it's a whole world of investment. And yeah, I don't know. It's bleak.
I mean, listen, the word corruption, I started using that in my work, and I did a manuscript workshop in Berlin, and people didn't like that. I mean, they weren't like aggressive toward me about it, but they didn't like that because of the reasons Will is saying. But my response, at the break was like, don't we need like some language to discuss this problem? Because, the right took our other word, degenerate. I love saying degenerate bourgeois culture. I love that, but they took that from us. Now they use the word degenerate.
Yeah.
So
The fascists have that now.
yeah, that's a fash word.
I still haven't forgiven them for that.
And it sucks because that word rules, and that was our word. And so now you need to talk about this somehow. Corruption seems like a good idea to me as any. There's no way that you can look around and be like, right, we're spiritually well-ordered people. We're not.
We're killing it right now.
This
And I'm
slaps.
saying you can see that from the movie theaters to the art gallery. It's obvious.
Yes.
We're so great. I just agree.
Can I read a couple of lines from the end of the ninth letter just as a last
Do
note
it.
here?
We'll end off there.
Schiller writes, Live with your century, but do not be its creature. Work for your contemporaries, but create what they need, not what they praise. Think of them as they ought to be when called upon to influence them. Think of them as they are when tempted to act on their behalf. In seeking their approval, appeal to what is best in them, but in devising their happiness, recall them as they are at their worst. Then your own nobility will awaken theirs, and their unworthiness will not defeat your purpose.
That just is so great. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I think that does it for us today. New episodes of What's Left of Philosophy come out every 2 weeks, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube for videos and live streams. Before closing out today, we'd like to take a minute to thank some of the people who are supporting the show on Patreon. We couldn't do this without you, and we're really grateful. Today's new patrons are Adam Schipper, Nicholas Pfeiffer, Yafeng Luo, Lugi, Jeffrey Glass, Yichu Wang, Sebas Alacron, Nicodemus Nicoludis, Kareem, Birch Costum, Nicole Yoakum, Andrew Ricks, Simon King, Mr. Stephen Cropper, Zaina Bickley, Alexander, Nick Pallar, Wade Dean, Michael Glide, and Akitaris. Thank you all very much. If you too like what we're doing and want to support the show, please go to our website, leftofphil.com, and click the support button. Patrons get access to exclusive content like locked episodes, bonus videos, and access to our Discord server. You can also buy some What's Left of Philosophy merch from the store linked on our website. Follow us on Twitter at leftofphil, and don't forget to leave us good reviews and comments on your podcast app. With that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.